My name is Colleen Fava. I'm the Assistant Director of the LaSpace program. That's the overall program of which LaACES is a component. You will see me on occasion. I will pop in whenever we're working on any communications. Whenever we're trying to work on documents, if we're doing lab reports, I'm going to be popping in and out, giving you some advice. When things are normal, I will usually show up a lot just to say hi and check in on the LSU team. Occasionally, I have been invited to the other campuses and have done some workshopping with the students on some of their projects. We're still in scary times, so our interaction is limited, but I would be open and interested in smaller Zoom engagements with some of the teams if you want to have some conversations or workshop some issues. We try to be really supportive. This program is run both centrally and locally, right? So the LSU team has a ton of experience, a bunch of different experts covering all the bases. But all of the university teams have extremely competent instructors. Okay, so today we're just going to talk quickly about keeping a lab notebook. This is going to be like a 15-20 minute presentation. Ideally, you would be in a room with a notebook and you would start using it today, but we'll just talk about how you'll use your notebooks as soon as you have them. If you do have them, you can start using them when we get to that part. Okay, so first things first, what is a lab notebook? It is a complete record of the work that you'll be doing over the course of this semester. Everyone who works on scientific experiments, engineering projects, students who are working in a lab as a research assistant, if you are doing a senior design project, you will have to keep a lab notebook. If you become a practicing scientist or engineer, you will have to keep a lab notebook. You will put all of the questions that you're asking. What experiment are you doing? Why are you doing it? How was it performed? What are some of your preliminary results? Questions that you're asking. Any data, charts, photos, ideas, problems, questions that come up, changes in your process, changes in the direction of your experiments. All of those things go in your lab notebook. Additional reasons for keeping a lab book. So these are all reasons why it helps you with your actual experiments, with the actual project that you're working on. But a lab notebook also can serve as a legal document. You could use it to prove the origination of an idea, to get a patent, copyright. You can use it to defend against accusations of fraud, a lawsuit, etc. But only if the lab notebook is kept properly. How will you use this lab notebook? So Dana mentioned earlier in his presentation that everything we tell you you need and everything is cumulative. So it's all going to build upon each other, right? So you'll get a bunch of basics early on in the fall semester. You'll start having some simple applications of those basics. It'll get more complicated all the way through the putting it all together capstone project at the end of the semester. And we will assume by the beginning of the spring semester that you've learned everything you need to know in order to initiate your own project. The lab notebook is super, super crucial in the beginning, but it is absolutely invaluable in the second semester when you're actually working on a project that you're designing. We're going to look at your lab notebooks. At least at LSU, we will definitely be taking a peek to see, what your progress is like. If we see any issues that you might be struggling with, making sure that you're capturing everything that needs to be captured. I highly recommend that the instructors at the other institutions also periodically peep in at your notebooks. Preparing your lab notebook. So this is not just some random taking notes for class notebook or jotting down ideas journal. You want to have a clear and clean format. So you want on the front cover of your notebook to put the pertinent information, your name, the context. So in this instance, it's LaACES at LSU. If you're an LSU student, if you're at McNeese, it's going to be LaACES at MSU, and so on. You want to put the beginning date, the first day that you used this lab notebook, And when you're done, when you've filled out this entire notebook, you're going to put your end date. Now, when you go on into your professional careers and you're using lab notebooks, you can have a dozen notebooks that are all related to the same project. So taking care to date these things and keep them neat and clean and chronological, and you can say, okay, I remember, in year 2 of the project, I was working on such and such, and you can access it easily. Also, these days, people often will scan their notebooks. They'll still use a physical manual hard copy notebook, but then they'll scan those pages into like a text readable, searchable application so that they can find information easily. But we're not going to do anything that fancy. You're going to create a table of contents. This will help you reference and find things. So if you had your notebooks in front of you right now, we would pause and you would number the first 3 pages front and back as TOC 1 through 6 for table of contents. And then we would number the rest of the pages starting with number 1. You also want to establish a set entry table of contents format so that you name things inside your notebook as you're taking notes and then reference them in the table of contents. So if you had, for example, one of the activities, you'll be taught how to solder. Perhaps you have trouble with the soldering and someone gives you, a little cheat or a tip for how to do it effectively. And you put that in your lab notebook. You want to make sure that in your table of contents, you can easily find it because maybe 4 months down the road, you have to start soldering on your payload for flight. And you're like, oh, I remember I had this issue and someone gave me a tip. What was it? Well, you can find it nice and easily. What goes into your lab notebook? Everything. Not really everything. I'm exaggerating, but you want to take notes on the lectures. Don't write down every single thing that you see on the slides or that the instructor is telling you, because you can access these slides. But important information or explanations that are found within a presentation that you want to be able to reference back to, you might say, oh, okay, that lecture 5.02, this equation was included in an explanation of the background and its use. And then you can find that, you can go look for that PowerPoint more easily on the website. You also want to document, group activities, any tests that you do, experimentation that you do, activities that you do, especially the process, right? When you do like your full setup, all the equipment that you have, your step-by-step, so that you can fully see how you conducted something and what your results were. And then also your thoughts, ideas you have, we're going to give you the opportunity early in the spring semester to choose what you're going to focus on for the science portion of your payload experiment. And you may start having some ideas, maybe even in another class, you're studying some concept and you're like, oh, hey, UV light. I wonder if that's something that could apply to this experiment, or something about the solar eclipses. You might want to have an experiment that is relevant to the solar eclipse that could be applicable in a couple of years, should you stick with this program. Attachments in your lab notebook. So you don't only have to handwrite out everything that you put in your notebook. There are certain things that you want to have easy access to that are very relevant to something that you're working on. For example, a lot of the hardware and sensors that you're working with will have, a spec sheet or a data sheet that, has some crucial information that is useful when you're doing calibrations. And you want to have that easily accessible. You could tape that into your notebook. You might want to put some graphs into your notebook. You might want to take a photograph of your actual lab setup when you're about to do your experiment so that you can show all the exact items that you were using. How often should you be using your lab notebook, and how should you be using it depending on the frequency, right? So daily, and by daily, I don't mean every single 7 days a week, but every day that you're working on the project, every day that you're in the lab doing something, you should be using your lab notebook. notebook. There should be something that you can reference and put into your lab notebook. Now, the more active you are into the activities and working on your payload, the more you're going to put into your notebook, but you should be using it every day. I suggest that at least once a week, you review that week's entries. So let's say you're coming in on, 5 days a week. You have your lectures on Tuesday and Thursday, and then, maybe Monday and Wednesday, you're just doing some outside work, reviewing materials. Then maybe on Friday, you just look back over all of the notes that you had made that week, just to refresh, make sure you understand the information that's in there, make sure you, recognize your own handwriting, make sure you didn't abbreviate something incorrectly. And then monthly, you go all the way back. And this is gonna, probably the first month, you're gonna be like, I haven't forgotten anything. This is, not a big deal. I don't need to review it monthly. But by the time you're about 3 months in, you really have a lot of information in there and you may have forgotten things, or you may not realize that you got some stuff wrong and you could be putting some clarifications in. So every once in a while, just looking back through everything you've written down will really help you, number one, refresh, but number two, catch any gaps or issues or errors. This is a little checklist, which tips for keeping a useful lab notebook, okay? So these are things that are, some of them are recommendations and some of them are absolutes, right? So you never ever remove a page. If you remember, I said that this could be used as a legal document in a court of law. If you remove a page physically, if there's evidence of a page being physically removed, there's a reason why lab notebooks are not 3-ring binders. They're not those, fancy perforated pages. Lab notebook pages are hard to pull out, and that's for a reason, because it's supposed to be a complete record of the experiment. So you pull a page out and you've basically compromised the integrity of the document. You want to use consecutive pages, don't jump around. You want to cross out unused parts of a page. You don't want to leave blank space where you could go right in later, because again, it's supposed to be consecutive, and any additions that are made, it needs to be noted. So if you wind up where you just have a half blank page, just put a nice X through it. So it's unused, page intentionally left blank, so to speak. Don't omit any results, even the really odd ones or the errors. You want to document all of that. You'll learn something, right? So if you do a test and you get a result you didn't expect, and then you tweak your approach, you want to document that tweak, especially if then all of a sudden you had the right answer or the expected answer. So you want to have that information available. You want to leave some space. Don't cram every inch of the page, because as I mentioned during your monthly reviews, you might go back and realize, oh, that's not the right abbreviation for that. That's not the right equation for that. I misinterpreted that. I want to, make an observation that that's not what that is. You put a note in and you put it in the margins clearly as an addition. You initial it and you date it. Any mistakes that you make, you want to just cross those out lightly. It's something where you're like, oh, I didn't mean to write that. You want to just a light cross out. One, you might need to know what that mistake was. You might realize that you did actually need that information. But also, again, integrity of the document. You don't want it to look like you're trying to hide something. Avoid felt tip pens because they can bleed through to other pages and make it difficult to read. Use a full date, either spell out the month or use a spelled abbreviation of the month to avoid international date problems. This is just a good habit to get into. We're not working with international teams right now, but in the future, if you pursue a career in science or engineering, you will more than likely be working with international teams. And then timestamp both the beginning and the end of the entry. So don't just let it be that the next entry has the beginning time. You want to also end your entry, so you have very clear delineation. This is a format review checklist, and then we'll do a content review checklist. So you want to make sure when you're looking at a lab book, are you using a black or a blue ballpoint pen? Are you using additional colors or highlights within reason? You don't want, this is not like a rainbow production, you know, pretty fun colors. You want to use colors in a way that is going to be helpful. So for example, perhaps you're refining your hypothesis for your project. And maybe every time you rewrite your major goal for your experiment, you highlight it with a yellow highlighter. Perhaps every time you have a failure or an unexpected result, you use a red pen to put a red asterisk next to that result so that you can quickly kind of scan through your book and find that kind of information. You want to make sure that your handwriting is legible. You know, take your time entering that information. It can be time consuming. You feel like you just want to get, you know, you want to just do the work and you don't want to document it, but you need to document it because if it's not written down, it did not happen. You want to keep your table of contents up to date. Don't forget to keep those references. It'll be harder to do later. You want your entries to all be fully dated, beginning and end timestamps. You want clear headings, right? So when you're working on something, if you're beginning the Skeeter-Sat calibration, make a nice, you know, maybe all caps header that says Skeeter-Sat calibration. Write in first person. Okay, this is a document of your work. So I heated the water in the beaker to 212 degrees. Precise, complete sentence, using verbs, using first person. You want to know that another person with a similar skill set could pick up your book and replicate what you have done. You also want to use that book to think, right? So are you clearly thinking through the notebook? Did something weird happen? Did you ask some questions? Did you document some possibilities? And then did you find some answers? And then the last bullet on here is storing your notebook safely and properly. Every institution should identify a space where the students will keep and access their books. Content checklist. So these are just the things that should be in your book. So all of your plans, all of your ideas, the realities, right? So you might have an idea and a plan, and then you set to work and you realize, oh, that didn't work. Okay, so how am I changing that plan? That should be in your notebook. Observations, risk mitigations. Okay, here's a potential problem. This is what I think I'm gonna, try to do to avoid that. Conversations that you might have with, a scientist on campus that might be giving you some advice or, mentoring you through a project. Links, so to speak, in quotation marks, to other spaces where information exists. So we talked about making references to content that's in the lectures, but you could also be referencing to data that's on discs, in instrument logbooks, in manuals, or even in members of your group in another notebook. So the person who's working primarily on the mechanical design, you may make a reference to the fact that the majority of the content for that work is in Jennifer's notebook. Okay, you can put emails in there. You might summarize some articles that you've read that are influencing your thinking or your understanding. You might put suggestions, hints, tips that you get from friends, colleagues, other mentors. And you can have, questions, concerns, failures, things that you don't understand. All of it can go in your notebook. Okay, so at this point, we would start kicking off using our notebooks. I don't know if anyone actually has a lab notebook yet. The LSU students, we bought notebooks for you. Hurricane Ida has messed with the delivery. They should have been here by now and we would have distributed them to you tonight and you would start using them. I believe that we will have them by Tuesday. So you will start using them, document the things that you are learning, the questions that you have, the important references to the lectures. Don't worry if you write stuff down that doesn't turn out to need to be in your notebook. You want to just get used to using it. I suggest that you get to the lab 15 minutes before the session's going to start. Look at your lab book, set up your time and date stamp to get yourself ready. And then the final suggestion for getting started is to find someone in your group who's willing to be a buddy and you look at each other's lab books. It's really important to have other eyes on your work. you might not realize that you have left out a step that you took in a procedure, because in your head it's so obvious that you just kind of fill in the blank, but someone else looks at your book and says, well, didn't you have to heat the water before it got hot in order, to see if it could survive at that high temperature, or to see if it could read that high temperature? You missed that step, but someone else looking at it's like, well, obviously I heated it, but I didn't write it down. And if I didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And that's all I've got. Do we have any questions?
For the team management and all of that, is that information recorded in the lab notebook?
Like the team contract is not in the lab notebook. The team contract is its own separate document. And it's actually the first team project that the students work on. We give you very little guidance because it's meant to be an experience in which you start to work as a team. However, once you have fully established that and you're working on that kind of stuff, you should have the names of your team members and their major tasks. And then you would put detailed information about your own work in your lab notebook. And so if you're the mechanical person, your notebook is going to be heavy on the mechanical design. If you're the electrical, it's going to be heavy on the electrical. If you're the project management person, it's going to be, worrying about all the other tasks and keeping people on mission, etc. Does that make sense?
Yes. I have another question. So every day when we record the lab notebook, do we have to write our team member name like in the front every day?
No. So for one, you're not going to be in teams until next semester, and your notebook is yours. So, you will make references. You might say like, John's latest mechanical design is, doesn't have the insulation that we need. I'm looking into this to help him, but you're not gonna reference your team members on every entry. Like that's not really relevant. The work is what you want to be documenting. So there's a couple of questions in the chat. I think they might be just direct to me instead of global, but basically some of the instructors are asking about digital lab books instead of physical lab books. At your institution, you should do how you want to do. I think, honestly, in the age of COVID and living where we do with our natural disasters, the more you can be online, probably the better. We have not had an internal discussion about moving into an electronic format. I don't think any of the people in our team on their own science experiments work in a digital format, except maybe Doug. Doug might actually use a digital format. That's a conversation we'll need to have. LSU students are going to be expected to keep a physical notebook. But I think at your locations, you can decide what works best for you. I would say, however, that there is a benefit to handwriting and drawing things out. So I think even if you have a digital notebook, you should be using it on, a platform like a Surface Pro or an iPad, where you could actually, still kind of get the same feel as a notebook. You're just storing it digitally. But that's just, a recommendation. There's no requirement.